It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Robert Baer, who will be speaking about his near-death experience that changed his life. As you may know, Robert Baer is a multiple near-death experiencer and multiple spiritually transformative experiencer, including 3 near-death experiences. He had his first near-death experience in 2009 when he died for 45 minutes from a heart attack. And the near-death experience, including the life review that he had, absolutely changed his life. Robert Baer is a retired California Highway Patrol police officer with 23 years experience, and he currently is a business consultant. And Robert Baer, as you may know, is the vice president and co-founder of Spiritual Awakenings International. Thank you, and let's welcome Robert Baer.
Thank you, Yvonne. Dr. Kayson, it's a real honor to be here and to speak in front of everybody. And if our scheduled host or guest shows up for his presentation, I'll gladly turn it over to him. But for those of you that don't know me, I am Robert Baer, and I'm someone that has probably a little unique past. I think we all have unique pasts, but mine might be a little bit different than most. I was a California Highway Patrolman for 23 years. And when I was a California Highway Patrolman, I made a lot of contacts with other policemen around the state of California. We were very close. And I retired 1992. And in 2008, I got a call from one of the guys I used to work with. And you always know you have a good friend when somebody calls you or contacts you and you have a conversation, even if you haven't talked to them in months or years, the conversation just kind of continues from the last time you talked to him or her. And that's what happened. I had a friend of mine call me, and we were talking about all the different things we used to, people we knew and who's still alive and where they are and so on and so forth. And then he stopped and he said, "Robert, I have to ask you a question." I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Are you right with the Lord?" And I said, why'd you bring that up? And he said, "I don't know. I just compelled to ask you." And I said, "Well, I think I am." And we just continued our conversation. And a short time later, I was asleep in my home, and at the foot of my bed, I got woken up. At the foot of my bed was my mother, and my mother had passed away in 2005, and she looked absolutely beautiful. And she talked to me. It might have been telepathically, I'm not sure. But she told me that I was going to die and to get my affairs in order. And I was so upset at myself because I had her there, and I should have told her how much I loved her. But she took off. She just left. And all that happened to me, I was in a pool of sweat. It just totally rocked me. And I couldn't go back to sleep. And I had a full physical scheduled with an internal medicine doctor. And I went to the physical, and I was thinking about my mom talking to me and even about my friend. But I passed with flying colors. It was a treadmill type test, and plus you got the blood in the urine and all the other things. So I kind of put that out of my mind. And my friend died. My police friend that had called me and asked me if I was right with the Lord, he passed away. And I mean, I had a hard time with him, with his death. And I drove down to California and I took part in his eulogy and met up with everybody and saw his family, saw a bunch of old friends, and came home. A couple of weeks later, at the foot of my bed was my friend, almost the same scenario as my mother. He was there. He was young, like when we were young. He was just there, and I asked him, "What is this, a dream? What are you doing here?" And he goes, "No, I want you to know I'm going to bring you through the light." And I said, "What?" He said, "I'm going to bring you through the light." But he said, "I have to go. I want to go visit my kids, my grandkids in Sacramento." He took off. Same thing happened to me. Pool of sweat, couldn't go back to sleep. It was really eerie. I made a couple phone calls in the morning and found out his grandchildren actually were in Sacramento. That's where they lived. So I just had to find out personally whether that was true or not. So I ended up going to Phoenix, Arizona, and every year I would go out there and visit with my son and my granddaughters, take them to some spring training games. It was always usually in March. And my son was a high school baseball, football, and basketball coach. And so he had like a spring break. So I'd go down and we'd spend time with his girls and just had really good time. So I was down there in 2009 and it was extremely hot down there. It was in March, but it was over 100 degrees or close to it. And I'm from a coastal climate in Oregon. I live on the coast. And when I do anything that has to do with being around the heat, I feel really uncomfortable. And I felt bad the whole week, and I didn't say much except I didn't feel well. And I got to thinking to myself, I'll be really glad to get out of here this time and go back to Oregon where it's cooler. Well, the day came. This was March 22nd, 2009. The day came. My son dropped me off at the airport. We said our goodbyes. I wasn't feeling well. I looked at the long TSA line and I thought, how am I going to do this? Because I wasn't feeling good. But I went ahead and I made it through the line. And I want to thank Alden Butcher and Ann Archer Butcher. They did a slideshow for me, a PowerPoint show, just a couple of days ago. That is what I usually talk on. The reckoning, how my NDE life changed, my review changed my life. And is Joe working the slides? This is me. This is my life when I was younger. Grew up in the Santa Cruz, San Jose area. That is me, my first day as a policeman. I was 21 years old. I worked for Santa Cruz Police Department, and that is actually my first day on the job. And I'm just looking at my hair, and what a difference. But and the fellow that I talked about, that it was at the foot of my bed, and by the way, he said, who's going to bring me through the light? We worked together in this time period. That's where we first met. So we'd been friends for a long, long time. Goes back to the 60s. And I'm going to go back to the scenario about being in the airport. I made it through TSA. I think there's a slide on here with the airport. No, there it is. Made it through the TSA line, went into the airport. I bought a couple of aspirin in one of the little convenience stores there. and all they had was aspirin. They didn't have anything else, so I bought it. It's probably a good thing I did, and I took it. But as I was waiting for an opportunity to board the plane, I just kept getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And finally, it came to the time to board the plane. I went on the plane, started to put stuff in the overhead bin, and I dropped dead from a massive heart attack. And I'm telling you, I don't remember anything that happened to me while on the plane from this point on, because I gravitated into a light, and it was just a marvelous feeling. And there was somebody with me, maybe more than one individual or soul, or I'm not sure how to describe it. I like to think it was my friend, because if he told me he would do something, he would do it. And I went ahead and I gravitated to a location that I ended up in front of a higher power. It was the most humbling thing I've ever experienced in my life. It still shakes me up to even talk about it. I know after I talk about this today, I won't sleep for a couple of days. Every time I bring it up, I go back and relive some of the things that happened. Well, I was in front of this higher power, and I could not look. It was so humbling. And I was told something. I don't know what language. I don't know whether it was telepathically. I just understood and was asked a question. And the question was, what good had I done in my life? I got that from this higher power. And as soon as that happened, I looked over to my left, and I noticed all these individuals that were, I don't know whether they're souls or, I don't know. It was like an auditorium, but it wasn't an auditorium. It was like a football stadium, but it wasn't a football stadium. It was just packed. And I had a life review that started. And it started from the day I was conceived until the day that I died. And everything that happened in my life went right before me. And there's nothing but truth. All truth. It was laid out. I could feel my feelings in every event in my life. I could feel the feelings of the persons that I interact with. I understood their emotions, their thoughts, and a lot of them weren't good. And I saw things that just unfolded, whether it was your friends or your family, the wonderful things that happen in your life, the not so wonderful things. I relived it all, and it just kept going. And I talk about this quite a bit when I do these presentations. Like I saw my grandmother's there, and I had a problem when I was a little kid. I had a stuttering problem, and I had one grandmother that really took an interest in working with me, and I would spend some time with her, quite a bit of time. And she was a widow, and she would really try to get me to slow down and kind of do things that to make me not have the problem where I would stutter all the time. So I always asked her things, but the thing I mostly asked her was to tell me about the Buffalo Bills Wild West show. She had seen it as a young girl, and she would tell me those stories, and I'd hear it, and then 10 minutes later, I would ask her about it again. And she was so patient with me. She'd say, "Robert, I just told you about that." And I said, "I want to hear it again." Well, she would tell me. And this was before television. We would listen to the radio, like The Shadow and some of these old shows, Amos and Andy, and there were a lot of them on the radio. Probably a lot of people in the audience can't relate to that, but maybe some of you can. And I would be with her, and even when I was in bed with her, she would snore, and I could hear the snoring. I could smell her smell. It was just like I was there. I was there. And she passed away in 1954, I believe it was. And we had a Christmas celebration. That's my parents, my mother and father. That's my mother, by the way, that told me I was going to pass at the foot of my bed. And I got a little more to go with the story in a few moments. But my grandmother was just awesome. And my dad and mom had given her a Kodak Brownie camera for Christmas. And I actually saw this in my life review. She was so frustrated trying to put the film in there. And my father would come over and he'd say, "Let me give you a hand with it." And she would say, I don't want this. It's too complicated. And in retrospect, I kind of feel that way about my cell phone and some of my electronic stuff, because my granddaughters are always trying to get me to do things and with my phone and whatever. And I really don't want all that stuff. But when I visit them and come back, I have all these apps on my phone and they load all this stuff on there. But I saw my grandmother. She was so special to me. And I saw my other grandmother. She was there, and she was deaf, had lost her hearing, and blind. She had cataracts. My father had built a house behind our house. We moved her in and we took care of her. And that's what family did in those days. And I was assigned things like watch television with her, or read things for her, and she couldn't see the television, but she could hear it. And we all took turns doing stuff for her. And this just kept unfolding, this life review. I played sports. I was really good at sports. I pitched, and I was nasty. I'd go right at somebody. I didn't care if I hit them, if they were crowding the plate. That's just the type of a personality that I had. And I saw everything happen, one thing after another. I saw a situation where I was out with my neighbors, and there was my friend was with me, and he threw a rock and it went through the window of our neighbors, and he took off and ran. And my neighbor came out and accused me of throwing the rock through the window. And I said, I didn't do it. Well, she got all upset, told my parents. I got disciplined. When I saw that part of my life review, I heard a voice say, I was wrong. I'm sorry. That had to be her. I was wrongly accused, and I paid for it. My parents were very strict. And it seems like the more I denied it, the guiltier they thought I was. It's just the dynamics of the family. And I also had a situation where we used to load up in our station wagon, and kids would be running all over. I heard Brian talk about being with his brother and falling out of the car and well, that could have happened in my family tons of times. But we went to, we'd go every Saturday morning, we'd go shopping, and I pretty much knew who to ask. I would ask my father for something, and he would just give me the money. I'd ask my mother for something. She always said no. But if my father was around my mother, he would always say, ask your mother. And so anyways, I was in the store and I asked my father if I could have a 5-cent pack of baseball cards. And he said, I thought he'd say just sure. But he says, no, you better ask your mother. My mother was right there. And she said, what do you want? And I said, I want this, know if I could have this 5-cent pack of baseball cards. And she goes, no. So I stole them. And I went, we went home. I was in my bedroom and I just opened them up. And there was this little stick of chewing gum that came with the baseball cards. And I wrapped the paper, just put the stick of chewing gum in my mouth. And my mother opened the door and she just said, Robert, what do you have there? I mean, I got busted. And worse, I lied about it. So my mother had my father load me in a car and they both took me down to the store. And I had to apologize to the store owner. And my mom just went off on a tangent saying, if you want to call the police, call the police. This is unacceptable in our family. This can't happen. We don't want a thief and this, that, and the other. And I could read the mind of the store owner in my life review. It was like, I'm not going to do this. He's just a little kid. And so anyways, my dad paid for the baseball cards and my mother took them. And we made it home. It was a long ride home. I got disciplined. But when I was going through my life review, when I came back to life, I was talking to my father about this. And my father goes, I remember that. And he was kind of laughing. And I said, Dad, you and Mom did your jobs. That had a profound effect on my life. He goes, really? And I said, yes. And the picture you have up there right now is my mother and father. And I was trying to explain to my father when my life review started. And I said, it started when I remember seeing a lady, and I think it was my mom, in a plaited skirt. And I remember seeing a black car, and I said, I think it was a Chevrolet. And my dad goes, really? I said, yeah. I said, that's when it started. It was right around that time period. So my dad went into his office and rummaged through some pictures and came back and showed me this picture, the one that's on the screen right now. He says, is that what you saw? I said, that's exactly what I saw in my life review. I had never seen this picture before, ever. And my father goes, that's the day we found out your mother was pregnant with you. I said, what? He goes, yes. He said it was probably one of the happiest days of her life. And he said, we went down and got married right after that. I said, you got married after you found out? He goes, yeah. I said, you mean I was a love child? He was laughing. I said, yeah. He says, your mom's passed, so, might as well tell the truth. But that is where my life review started, right there. That's the first thing I remembered. And that's when my life began. It began at conception. But getting back to my life review, I saw things unfold. I had some friends that I used to like to go cruising with. And I grew up in the Santa Cruz, San Jose area. So there was a beach boardwalk and surfing and all different types of things that pertained to just kind of having fun. And I used to like to go cruising with them. And my sister, who was only about almost 11 months younger than me, we used to call ourselves the Irish twins. But she couldn't go out on a date unless I went on the date. That'd be a double date. And she had to be in the front seat with her boyfriend, and I'd have to be in the back seat. And I usually asked somebody to go with me. And there was this one lady that I'd asked to go with me. And I was working on my car one day, and she came up to me and she said, Robert, there's a dance at the Coconut Grove. Can you take me? And I said, well, no, I'm going to go cruising with my friends. And she said, what? And I said, no, I don't want to go to the dance. And she said, well, can I go with you? And I said, no, we're not going to, they won't want a girl there. And she got all upset. She came back and had this letter that she wrote. And she kind of threw the letter at me. She was really upset. And I picked the letter up. And at the time, I thought, I don't want to read this. So I kind of put it aside. And that night, I did go cruising with my friends. But she went out with some other friends. And they were, in fact, they were in a 56 Chevy and got in an accident. And 3 of the 4 died in the accident. She was one of them. It was a horrific traffic accident. So when I saw that part of my life review, the letter part, I heard a voice say, "You never opened my letter." I knew exactly who that was. I knew it. And I was, I'd broken her heart. And like I said, my life review was a reckoning. I got to feel what people felt, and as a result of my actions. And well, there's a lot of good too. I mean, I had a situation where I really liked this young lady from Newport Beach, California, and her parents came up to the Bay Area, and they wanted to know if I wanted to spend a day with them, and I said sure. So it was one of the best days of my life. Her mother had to go with us, but that was okay. I had a good time, and just saw these things happen. And then I became a policeman, and my whole attitude changed. The way I looked at life, it was just black and white. I had saw all the different scenarios that I'd been through, where there'd been altercations. I remember this guy told me one time that he was going to rip my shirt off. I was going to arrest him for being drunk in public. He ripped my shirt off. He really did. Trying to arrest him. I finally got him, but got him handcuffed and everything. But he'd actually ripped my shirt off. I saw all these different things unfold, and when I became a policeman, I did go to Santa Cruz Police Department for a year, but then I had taken the test also for the California Highway Patrol, and it paid quite a bit more at the time. So I went ahead and accepted a position there, and I ended up going to the academy. I think I finished number 2 in my class, and I was sent down to the South Los Angeles Watts office. And this was right after the riots. And I'm going to tell you, it was like a war zone. It really was. It was just something that you had to just be on guard the whole time. It was like everybody was mad and violent and argumentative. And if you were in a uniform, police, especially like me, thank you for the picture, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, you weren't one of their favorite people there. So I have talked about this story a few times, this actual scenario, where I was with another guy that night. We had stopped somebody for drunk driving in Watts. It was in the Compton area. And during the riots, the state of California, the Highway Patrol took over a lot of the patrol. It was called, you were part of the governor's force, and that's what I was. I was one of those guys. And so I was working in a car with another guy. They wouldn't let us go out single at night. As soon as it got dark, they doubled us up. We pulled somebody over, and he went into one of the apartment project areas in the alley, and it wasn't unusual for them to be 2 to 3 stories high. And it wasn't unusual either to be doing something and then looking up and having a rifle pointing at you. It was very intimidating. And one night, making a stop, going to arrest somebody, heard some gunshots go off, and I heard some footsteps, and I saw this guy running towards me, carrying a rifle. I yelled at him to halt. He didn't halt. My instincts kicked in. I did not draw down on him or anything. He came up, and he said that he had just been robbed, and he had fired some warning shots. And when I saw that part of my life review, I heard someone say, or something say, "Thank you for not shooting me." That had to be this individual. And I had all types of friends and encounters. One that really stood out to me was I had a friend that he'd been a hemophiliac and he couldn't play with us. He was my next door neighbor. And I would go over there and I would play card games with him and board games like Monopoly and Candyland and things like that. I was just a little kid, and he would play with me, do that. And his mother would make me a glass of Kool-Aid. I had my own little package. It was like cherry, and would give me this Kool-Aid. And during my life review, the glass was cold, and I could actually taste that Kool-Aid. It was phenomenal. And when I saw this part of my life review, I heard a voice say, "You are my best friend." I was telling my father about this after I'd passed and come back to life, and he said, "I forgot to tell you, in the 80s, Paul's dad came by and told me that and your mother that Paul had died. He'd had a problem with bleeding, and he had a blood transfusion, and he caught AIDS from it, and he died from AIDS." And my dad said, "I think that was Paul." And I said, "So do I." So these things just kept happening, one thing after another. And the hardest thing I had to deal with was betrayal. And betrayal comes in a lot of different scenarios. I mean, you get betrayed by your friends, you get betrayed by your work colleagues. If you've been through a divorce, sometimes you find out you've been betrayed during that time period. And that happened to me. And I saw the scenario play out. And I had gone through a divorce, which was not it was highly contested, and we did not part as friends. And we had a daughter who's an attorney now, but she had she'd had cancer, and was really she was really sick. And I drove up to be there for her surgery, and so did her mother. And I hadn't seen her mother in years. And we had to sit in the same surgery waiting room together. And I just looked at her and I said, we have a daughter who's really sick. She needs us. And we should probably just try and bury the hatchet and do what's best for her, because we didn't know if she was going to make it. And so we agreed to do that. And we started to talk. And I said, there's something that happened to me that I just have to ask you this question. And she goes, okay. So I asked her about the betrayal part that I'd seen in my life review. She admitted it. There's nothing but truth where I was. Nothing but truth. She was blown away. And of course, I was blown away. And I've had the hardest thing I've had to deal with my near-death experiences is trying to betrayal, because you see people again, you know what's happened, and sometimes you just got to be the bigger person and just don't say just it's just a life lesson. But getting back to work, I brought this one up too because I've done this before in other talks. There was a situation where I was the watch commander one night. Thank you. And I was called up to the scene of an accident way up in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and car had gone off the road and caught on fire, and there was somebody had died from it. Well, we pulled up the car, they got the fire out, pulled the car up. And it was a very unusual thing because the guy who was supposedly driving the car was laying across the seat, and he has arms crossed. And most of the people I'd seen that had died in car accidents where there were fires involved had been in the fetal position. And I looked at that and I thought, I don't know if this is a car accident. So talked it over with the officers, and I was taking pictures and everything, and called the sheriff's office out. And they looked at it and says, "Oh, that's a traffic accident." And I said, "Okay, well, we'll take it." And the guy didn't live too far from where the accident happened, the young man. So I had to do what sometimes you have to do. You have to knock on somebody's door and tell them what happened. And I had told the sheriff's department I would do it. So I drove to where this young man who had died lived, and it's kind of a secluded area. I pulled up the driveway, and as I pulled up the driveway, the lights came on in the house, and got out of my car and started to walk up to the front door, and I heard this woman screaming. And I rang the doorbell, and she answered the door. And I said, "Is there anybody here in the house with you?" She goes, "No, it's just me." She was crying. I said, "There's nobody here?" And she goes, "No." And she says, "You're going to tell me my son died." And she said, "That's my only son, my only child." And I had to tell her the truth. I said, "Yes." And she broke down. And when I was watching this part of the life review, I heard a comment: "Thanks for being so good to my mother." This ended up being a homicide because when they did the autopsy, they found a couple of slugs in this young man's chest. So my hunch was right. And also the guys I worked with, we kind of thought that might be the case. But I mean, that had to be her son who said that. Had to be. And When I was watching this life review, something was fidgeting off on the right, to the right, and I finally looked over there. I couldn't look at the higher power, but I looked over to the right, and my dog Scooter had passed away in 2001, and she was so close to me. She was like a best friend. I mean, we did everything together. Uh, she, she rode in the she rode with me everywhere, always in the front seat. Uh, uh, did everything. Went to the beach together. Went to work together. Um, she passed in 2001, and when I looked over to the right, I saw her. She was so excited to see me, and it just kind of distracted me for a while because I thought, "Oh, how neat is this?" And it's just like it was like a bonus. Here she was, and she couldn't come to me. I was hoping she would come to me, but she couldn't come to me. She she held her territory. She had, I don't know whether she was told she couldn't go any further or whatever, but she wanted to, and I wanted so bad to touch her and to hold her again. But she just kind of disappeared, and I had to pay attention to my life review, um, and I did. I just saw some horrific things that happened and some good things. I mean, I had quite a life. 23 years as a policeman. I was a supervisor for a majority of that time, so I had a lot of people that worked for me. I'd been a university professor and a lot of students. And when I did the graduate program, I was one of the persons that was in charge of looking at writing styles to see if they met the master's degree standards. So I, quite frankly, I probably prevented several of the students from getting their thesis passed at first, and I also took part in the oral defense panels. I was kind of hard on everybody, and plus I was a city manager, a community manager. I always had personnel issues, and that happens whether it's in business or whether it's in just about any line of work. You always have those to deal with, and I just saw my interaction and how it had affected lives. And I thought I was a good person, and I probably was, but I wasn't happy with what I saw. And I keep reliving these things in my mind all the time, even today. And also where I was, there were colors that don't exist in this earth. They were different colors. And you know, there's some nights where I'll be sitting and all of a sudden I feel it coming on, and I can actually like grab a cold drink or something, or a water, and just sit in total darkness, and I can actually see the colors again. It's phenomenal. And I was deceased for about 45 minutes, and I was so lucky. There were a couple of off-duty firemen from the Pacific Northwest that were on that plane who knew how to work a defibrillator and do CPR. And there was a doctor on the plane, and they just kept giving the oxygen to me. And I ended up in a hospital, and the doctor that I had told me he'd come in because he thought he had to write some notes to release somebody, and he realized he'd done it the day before when he got there, and all he heard me coming in on the ambulance, so he went down and responded down there, and that doctor wouldn't let me die. He was from Pakistan. He was a wonderful doctor. And I was revived after about 45 minutes. I was never stable. I ended up, from my life review, back into my body. I don't remember the particulars of that. But then I died again in the emergency room, and I had a total different experience. And the experience that I had was I was actually floating over the bed in the emergency room, watching them work on me. And I was actually looking at the screen, and it was flatlining. And so I ended up having my attention diverted to another part of the hospital. There was a couple of people in admissions going through my personal things that had come in the ambulance, and they were trying to find out who the hell I was. So I was paying attention to them instead of them working on me in the emergency room. They were trying to find my insurance cards, and I was trying to tell them where they were. Police people, a lot of us, we carry two wallets. One has all of our stuff, like our credit cards and all this other stuff. The other has our police ID. You have a badge, ID card, and I put my insurance card in my police wallet. And they were going through everything, and all of a sudden, they opened my police wallet and said, "Whoa, this guy's retired highway patrol." I remember seeing that, and I remember trying to tell them where everything was, and I realized at that time, I'm dead. So I come back to life again, and I'm in intensive care and have all these machines hooked up to me. It was horrible. And the doctor came in, and I was telling him about seeing these guys going through my belongings in my wallet. And he goes, "Really?" And I said, "Yes." He went and got those people, brought them back, and he said, "You tell them what you told me." And I told them, and they said, "That is exactly what happened, word for word." And if you hear somebody tell you about a near-death experience, and somebody gravitated into a light and had a life review, or you have somebody talk about hovering over their bed, watching them work on them. I had both of these things happen on the same day. Two different NDEs. And I like to say one thing. I usually say this because where I went, it's very difficult to talk about. And I usually say that I'm no different than Christopher Columbus or Marco Polo or even Mark Twain, where they went and did their adventures and they came back and they had to report back to the Queen, or in Mark Twain's case where he'd have a assembly hall and he'd talk about his travels. Our society is so used to having visual things like cell phone pictures or selfies or videos, all different types of things to prove things. Where I was, there's no cell phones, there's no pictures, there's no videos. It's my word, and it's whether you want to believe me or not. And I accept that one way or the other. I have to. I'm just relating to you what I remember and what I can recall. And it takes an awful lot to get up and talk in front of groups and talk about these different things. But have to do it. I think that's one of the reasons I came back to life. And I have had some effects from being deceased. I've lost the use of these two fingers, the ring finger and the little finger on each hand. I have a hard time focusing when I read a book. I can read a computer okay. My vision went from like 2090 to 2010. They don't know how that happened. And I'm constantly getting tested for that. Also, I set off alarms in stores. TSA, I can't go through there without having to do one of those body searches. Have set off microwaves, all types of electronic things. And I also came back with medium tendencies, and they're very hard to deal with. I chose not to develop those. I'm 74 years old. I don't really want anything new added onto my plate. And I can't talk to my friends, my police friends, about my near-death experiences. And quite frankly, I owe a lot to Dr. Yvonne Cason. She actually was instrumental in helping me start talking a lot. And her and I served on a board of directors for another organization and decided to start this one, Spiritual Awakenings International. And I think not only us, but everybody that's on the advisory board and on the board of directors and everybody that takes part in doing things and making the presentations for us, for everybody, has done something great for the world. I really do. I say this a lot because there was a time they would burn us at the stake. They would. People that have these hear voices or have these different things happen to them and try to explain them, and people think they're crazy. I know I couldn't talk about it. But that's where I am. That's a basic concept of what happened. I'm so lucky. I've had 4,829 extra days of life. What a gift that is. And my life has totally changed. I've been devoting my time to write not only SAI, Spiritual Awakenings International, but also like I write grants. I do a lot of different things for volunteer work. I was on a planning commission for 9 years, Humane Society for 3 years, implemented a no-kill shelter. That was a political quagmire, but and also just doing other things. But I started grant writing, and the picture you see is something that I was not anticipating, but happened. I won the Star Award for the state of Oregon for my work, and I was recognized as the top in the state. And I was in my 70s, so my life has not turned out the way that I thought it would, but I'm still here and still talking to groups. And I'm sure I've forgotten some things. It's time to turn this over because I've been talking for an hour. So if you have any questions or anything that you want to talk about or anything, I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Cason.
All right. Thank you, Robert. I always love hearing your story. I've heard it before, but it is really moving. I particularly love the story about your dog and how your dog Scooter was there. Incredible. So there are a whole bunch of questions here in the chat. So I'll just start from the beginning. So the first question is from Christine, and she'd like to know, what did you learn from betrayal?
That is a hard question for me to answer, but I'm going to answer it. You have to still live life. You still have to keep putting one foot in front of the other. People are human. They're going to do things. Sometimes it's a mistake the way they do it. Sometimes they may regret it later. Just like my ex-wife actually was very humbled. And she still, when I talk to her still about our daughter, she brings this up, asks for forgiveness. And yeah, sure, I have to forgive her. But it's hard to do that. But I've learned to forgive. It's hard, it's hard to forget, but I've learned to forgive. And that's probably the ultimate thing that I can say about those situations. And thank you for the question, by the way.
Thank you, Robert. Several people are asking questions about the colors that you were talking about, colors that we do not see here on Earth. And so I'm going to combine several questions. They're wondering, was it only while you were on the other side that you saw these colors, or are you also seeing these colors that don't exist here now that you're back?
Both. I'm very blessed for that. And it's a phenomenal thing. You can see my background. I'm obsessed with light. I take pictures, anything to do with light. That's my hobby now. I started doing photography. I haven't done a lot in the last couple of years, but I used to do it, travel around just trying to take pictures. Anything to do with light, but I'm obsessed with it. The colors I have in my background are not ones that I saw in my near-death experience. I don't know how to explain it. I actually heard somebody else talk to me about experiencing the same thing, who had been deceased. And we were trying to figure out, neither one of us could explain it. They just don't exist. But they're absolutely beautiful. And where I was it was just a wonderful, warm feeling. And hopefully I'll get to experience it again one day. Hopefully not soon.
Our next question is from Corinne. She says, I wondered if you, as an NDE survivor, have had a life review. Do you think you'll have to do another life review when you die this time? And do you think you're going to go through the same content in your life review again?
That's a good question. And I hope I don't have to. I hope it's from March 22nd, 2009 to now, but I don't know. I honestly don't know the answer to that. I do know, I don't know if there's going to be a question about that letter that I didn't open. I still have that letter. I have to find it. And I know I'm going to have to reconcile with that. I've kind of made up my mind I'm going to do that. It's somewhere in a storage shed. And got to have the time to do it. But I'm still trying to clean up things. And I don't know how. I really don't know. Hope not.
Thanks, Robert. We have another question from Dela. And Dela is saying, I'm wondering if during the life review, the people were actually there in spirit watching, or if it was just their feelings and sentiments were somehow being communicated to you.
I'm not sure of that either. I know the comments that I remember, more than likely everyone had been deceased. I know that. I don't know. I wish I could answer that.
Okay, I'm going to come back here. Ken wants to say to you, Robert, I hope this helps you understand how important and how impactful your story is. Despite years of reading, watching, and listening to NDE stories, I've struggled with lingering doubts as it relates to myself, like, am I really a soul? You have eliminated that doubt. So did you find your experience made you realize you were a soul, Robert?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it also made me realize I learned a lot from what happened. And I've learned a lot from you, Dr. Cason, by the way. Believe me, this lady's a real treasure when it comes to stuff about near-death experiences and spiritually transformative experiences. But I've even started to think in terms. So I grew up in an Irish Catholic household, and my beliefs are totally different. I believe in reincarnation now. I believe in past lives, and I just believe all that, and it's kind of opened my mind to everything. And I never would have thought that prior to March 22nd, 2009. Never. Next question.
All right. David wanted to say, Daniel Brinkley had a second near-death experience and had a second life review that was very different. He said much better than his first life review. So that gives you some hope that your next life review will be better than your last life review. All right, we have another question here. Christina says, I have heard some NDE speakers say that there is betrayal that we agree to before we incarnate. So as a rich experience, is that also possible?
I can't attest to it one way or the other. I think pretty much anything's possible now. I don't know how to answer that question. I don't know.
All right. And we have another question here. If I can find out. People are asking about the letter, but you've already told us that you've not read the letter.
No.
Anne would like to know, Robert, you said your life changed when you returned, and you now give back in many ways. So, is life more rich and rewarding for you now?
I think it is. And for example, after this conference today, I'm going to go work at a homeless shelter and work till about 11 o'clock. And I do a lot of volunteer work there. I actually wrote the grant for it. And I'm always doing stuff like that. Probably too much, but I believe it. I believe if you can make a difference in someone's life, it'll make a difference in yours too. And so that's it.
All right. So I'm gonna ask the question. We've done all the questions that are in the chat. If anyone has a question, now's your time to ask it of Robert. So you've had 3 different near-death experiences. You mentioned 2 of them today, and each of them was a little bit different. What do you think you learned from each of your near-death experiences? What did you learn something different from each of them?
Well, the big one was the life review, without a doubt. I mean, there's so many lessons to be learned there, and so many ways to take a really good look at your life and who you are as a person. Uh, the one where I died and was looking at everybody working on me and saw the flat line. I mean, it just happened. I don't know if I learned anything from that. The third one I had, which Dr. Cason knows about, I had a bleeding ulcer in 2010 and actually bled out and was in the hospital. And I was actually standing next to the bed where my body was in, watching them work on me. And that was a total different experience. Came back to life. And so I've had 3 different near-death experiences. And everyone that talks about it, I mean, it doesn't, nothing surprises me anymore. I also have this situation where I get these like premonitions or my sixth sense. I was telling somebody this the other day. In fact, it was Ann Archer Butcher and her husband Alden Butcher. I was actually driving on the Coast Highway, and something told me to pull over. I listened to it now. I pulled over, and as soon as I did, there was a truck, a logging truck, fully loaded logging truck, on the opposite side of the road coming right at me. And if I hadn't pulled over and listened to my intuition or my sixth sense, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. And I've learned to do that. And I think everybody in the audience, maybe they should, I'm sure you get those gut feelings. I think we all do. But boy, I pay attention to them now. And they've been spot on every time too. So
Great. Thank you, Robert. Thank you for your absolutely wonderful presentation. And thank you for stepping in.
Plan B.
when needed. So thank you, Robert. That was absolutely wonderful.